One drink changed everything, and Wolfe knows why she never breathed again. Welcome to Clue Law. I'm your host, Vale. Let me know where you're watching from. Your engagement gives these stories life. Let's dive in. If you want a quiet morning in Nero Wolfe's brownstone, my advice is simple. Don't schedule it. Quiet at West 35th Street is like a good alibi in a cheap poker game. Everybody wants one. Somebody always lies about having it, and it never survives the first round. That Tuesday began as close as we get. The weather had done us a favor by being November-y without making a fuss, and the house had fallen into its comfortable grooves. Fritz was in the kitchen doing things I'm not qualified to describe without embarrassment. Theodore Horstman was upstairs with the orchids, breathing rarefied air, Wolfe swore, improved thinking, which might be why Theo always looked faint, and Wolfe himself was in the north room, a broad, immovable monument behind his desk, chewing over his mail as if each envelope might bite back. I was at my desk in the office, feet on the corner, working on something polite people call correspondence, and I call not getting shot. I had just typed the second paragraph of a letter to a lawyer about a retainer that was overdue and therefore interesting, when the doorbell rang. The bell at Wolfe's has a sound like money being dropped into a tin cup, only louder. I heard Fritz's slippers in the hall, then a voice, low and careful, then Fritz again, a little higher, the way he gets when someone's manners need training, then footsteps on the stairs. Wolfe didn't look up. He never looks up at a bell. He lets the bell take its place in the universe while he finishes the thought he's on. It's one of his ways of being the law of gravity. Fritz appeared in the doorway, his face politely neutral in that rich Dutch way of his. "A lady to see you, Mr. Wolfe." Wolfe's eyes stayed on the letter he held. "Name?" "She gives it as Mrs. Cora Wynne." That did it. Wolfe's head came up. Not much, but enough to shift the climate in the room. "Mrs. Wynne?" he said. "Show her in." I had heard the name before, because New York is a gossip factory, and certain names come with receipts. Cora Wynne was a philanthropist in the manner of a woman who expects interest on her generosity. Rich, widowed, visible in the papers at charity dinners and art auctions. The sort who spent money on causes until the causes learned to behave. She had also, if the whispers were right, been attached to a now silent industrial titan who had left her a lot of money and not enough affection to balance it. Fritz went out. A moment later she came in. She wasn't what you'd call old, unless you say old for anything over 45, which I don't because it's a good way to get your tie pulled over your head. Slim, not tall, with black hair worn like a deliberate decision, and eyes that had learned to look straight, through rooms without bumping into anybody. She wore a coat that probably cost more than my first car, and carried a little leather case in hand, as if it were either a weapon or a confession. She didn't waste time on the room. People who have spent their lives being stared at don't give away free stares. She went to Wolfe's chair like he was a judge. She had already decided to bribe with truth. "Mr. Wolfe," she said. "Madam." Wolfe's tone was formal enough to qualify as architecture. "Be seated." She sat. Not on the red leather chair facing him. That one is for people who want to be impressive and aren't. She took the yellow one to the side, which told me she was either smart or tired. Wolfe's eyes flicked to me. "Archie." "Right here," I said. I'd already slid my feet off the desk and found a pencil. When Wolfe uses my name like that, it's a door opening. He turned back to her. "What brings you to my house, Mrs. Wynne? I will caution you that I do not involve myself in trivialities." She smiled once. It wasn't warm. It was more like someone touching a switch to see if the current was live. "I came because I don't believe you involve yourself in anything without having a reason," she said, "and because I'm out of reasons of my own." Wolfe liked that. He likes a sentence that stands on its legs. "My husband died 4 years ago," she went on. "I've had a large life since then, less personal than public. I'm accustomed to people wanting things from me in various disguises. She opened the small leather case and set it on her lap without opening it. This morning I received a request I don't understand and a warning I can't ignore. Wolfe's head inclined the fraction that means go on. She took a breath as if she were about to recite something she had memorized because she didn't trust herself to improvise. Yesterday afternoon I attended a private tasting at the Arcturus Club. The event was arranged by Mr. Lennox Hale. He is a collector of rare spirits. He is also an old friend of my late husband. There were 5 of us. Mr. Hale, Mr. Brent Ashford, who imports wine, Dr. Yvette Morel, a biochemist and enthusiast, Mr. Silas Creamer, a restaurateur, and myself. An unusual party, Wolfe murmured. The Arcturus Club encourages unusual parties, she said dryly. I went because I was curious and because Lennox Hale can be persuasive without seeming to try. The tasting featured a line of absinthes. He called it a historical survey. It was all very elegant. There were lecture notes, glassware, the proper sugar cubes, almost theatrical. I had 1 small pour of each. I left at 9. I slept as always. I woke at 7. She paused, and for the first time her composure had a hairline crack. Not fear exactly, more like indignation with something too slippery to grip. At 8:15 my secretary brought in the mail. Among it was an envelope with no return. Inside was a note. 3 sentences, typed. It read, "You drank what belonged to her. You took the last breath she ever meant to keep. Tonight you will return it, or tomorrow you will be mourned." Wolfe's eyebrows rose. If you've never seen Wolfe's eyebrows in action, imagine 2 caterpillars developing opinions. She held his gaze. I don't know who her is. I don't know what last breath means. I did not take anything, and I don't respond well to threats. That is evident, Wolfe said. Did you show it to the police? No, not yet. I want to understand what I'm dealing with before I invite official enthusiasm into my life. She tapped the leather case on her lap. The note is here. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, take it. I crossed, took the case, opened it. Plain cream paper, folded once, neat type. No signature, no smear of a thumbprint or lipstick. Whoever did it was either careful or had a secretary. I handed it to Wolfe. He read it slowly, lips barely moving, then held it a moment longer. He set it on the blotter like it was a piece of evidence in a museum. You are certain the note refers to the tasting? He asked. It would be a remarkable coincidence if it did not, she said. There is more. At 9 this morning, my assistant called the Arcturus Club. She said the manager told her that Mr. Hale was found dead in a private room shortly after midnight. That landed. Even Wolfe's stillness has weight, and for a beat you could feel it settle a little heavier. How did he die? Wolfe asked. The manager didn't say. He said only that the police are involved and members are advised to avoid the premises. He sounded afraid. Wolfe stared at her, lips pursed. If he'd had a tail, it might have twitched. You did not include that in your first statement for dramatic effect? Mr. Wolfe, I don't do dramatic effects, I do consequences. She met his eyes. You see why I came. Perhaps. Wolfe's voice went quieter, which is his version of leaning forward. But tell me, madam, why should I accept your problem? You have the police, you have money, you have influence, and certainly you have competence. She didn't flinch. Because I'm the one who received the threat. Because the man who arranged the tasting is dead. Because I suspect the threat is not empty, and I don't intend to let someone arrange my future with anonymous stationery. Wolfe nodded. A sensible posture. But there is another question. Why me? She considered. Because you are difficult to frighten. Because you have a talent for seeing the shape of a thing when others are still counting its edges. And because Lennox Hale once told me that if he needed the truth, he would come to you. There it was. The line that usually sets Wolfe's teeth into their most expensive posture. Mr. Goodwin, she said, turning to me. I assume you are Mr. Wolfe's operative. Sometimes. I'm his conscience, and sometimes I'm his chauffeur. Operative fits in there, I said pleasantly. I want to know why Lennox Hale is dead. Her voice didn't rise, but the room got colder. And I want to know who thinks I stole a final breath. If there is a danger, I want it named before it reaches me. If there is some grotesque misunderstanding, I want it ended now. Wolfe's fingers steepled. The top of his head is like a council chamber when he does that. We will need details. What absinthes were tasted? What was said? Who was attentive? Who was not? And we will need the police report, if they will tell me anything. They rarely do, but I have methods. She inclined her head. I can supply my memory. I can also give you access to Hale's notes if you can get them. He was proud of his collection, Mr. Wolfe. He kept meticulous files. He had shown me some before. He liked to present rarity as if it were virtue. His pride may now serve his murderer, Wolfe said mildly. Or his victim. Tell me about the others present. She took a moment, and I got the sense she was flipping mental cards over carefully because she didn't like the game. Brent Ashford is handsome, charming, and ambitious. He makes his living bringing expensive wine to people who pretend it's not about prestige. Lennox liked him. I do not. He talks as if he were auditioning for a lifestyle magazine. I know the type, I said. Silas Creamer owns restaurants. He is famous for knowing what people want to taste before they do. Lennox said he had an impeccable palate. I found him watchful. He spoke little, but when he did, everyone listened. Wolfe grunted, which in his dialect means noteworthy. Dr. Yvette Morel is a research scientist. She is French. She has a laugh like a cork being pulled. She and Lennox were close, not publicly. But I am not blind. She was the one who lectured us about wormwood, enthusiasm, and myth. She treated the tasting as a séance, in a manner. Séances are good for manufacturing ghosts, Wolfe said. And Lennox Hale himself, she finished. Her voice softened by maybe a millimeter, no more. He was delighted with the evening. He said he had acquired something exceptional. He called it the drink that stole her final breath. He said it was a phrase from its history. We laughed. He enjoyed that. It meant nothing to me then. She looked at Wolfe straight on. Now it does. I sat back in my chair, letting the words arrange themselves. He actually used the phrase that showed up in the note. I said, "Yes," she said sharply. He did. Wolfe's eyes drifted to the note on his desk, then back to her. Did he identify who her was? No. He only said it was a famous story and that he would tell it after the final pour. But before that could happen, there was a commotion downstairs. Someone from the club needed him. He was gone 10 minutes. When he returned, he said, we'd continue another time. He offered apologies, arranged cars. The evening ended. So the story was not told. Wolfe was already building the skeleton in his mind. I could see it in the way his pupils went still. What was the last absinthe that you drank? She thought. A bottle he brought out separately, darker than the others. The label was old, almost erased. He made a point of opening it himself. He said it was pre-ban, perhaps earlier, from a distiller who no longer exists. He poured precisely, watching the louche form in each glass as if it were a scientific phenomenon. And did anything odd occur after that last pour? No. Not that I noticed. We drank, she said with faint irritation. We said it was extraordinary. Lennox smiled, that is all. Wolfe sat silent. The house seems to hold its breath when he does. Even Theo's orchids upstairs might have paused their growing to listen. At last he said, Mrs. Wynne, I'm inclined to accept. Not at once, perhaps, but inclined. She didn't relax. People who've lived around money learn not to. What does that mean? It means, Wolfe said, that you will remain here for the moment while I consider the implications, and Mr. Goodwin will begin by going to the Arcturus Club to learn what he can. If the police are in residence, he will be discreet. If they are hostile, he will be stubborn. If there is a corpse, he will not touch it." "Hey," I said, "sometimes I only look like I want to touch a corpse." Wolfe ignored me. "You may have placed yourself in danger by coming to me. It was nonetheless wise. Should I take this case, the fee will be commensurate with time and annoyance. I anticipate both." She looked at him a second longer, then nodded once. "I accept those terms." "Good." Wolfe's tone was final enough to end a war. "Archie." I was already up, jacket in hand. "On my way. Any special instructions besides not getting dead?" "Yes." Wolfe's eyes didn't blink. "Find out what the phrase means. The drink that stole her final breath. It is the hinge on which this matter swings." I nodded. I like hinges. "They tell you where doors are." Mrs. Wynne stood. She moved to the window with that slow, controlled grace of someone who doesn't intend to show her back to a room full of knives. Outside, the street looked dull and innocent, which is the first trick New York ever learns. I headed for the hall, and Fritz caught my eye with the kind of quiet question he asks without words. I shrugged. If Fritz had been a cop, he'd have made lieutenant in a week. At the door, I looked back. Wolfe was already reaching for the bell on his desk to summon Fritz again, probably for beer. The man can accept a client with murder on the menu and still remember his schedule. "That's Nero Wolfe for you. The brownstone might be disturbed, the world might be playing at threats and death, but there are traditions in the house that don't yield without a fight." I opened the front door and stepped into the day. Somewhere across town, a man who'd tried to impress his friends with rare liquor was lying stiff, and a typed note was turning into a countdown. And I was going to a club where absinthe had been poured like a confession, and someone had decided that a final breath was property. If you believe in quiet mornings, you must also believe in unicorns. By the time I hit the sidewalk, I had Wolfe's order in my pocket, the note's phrase in my head, and exactly zero idea what kind of club thinks absinthe is a good way to spend a Monday night. That's not a complaint, it's a job description. The Arcturus Club sat off Madison in a building that looked like it had been designed by somebody who thought civilization peeked around the time waistcoats did. A doorman in a cap that probably had ancestors blocked my path, with the lush politeness of a man whose paycheck depends on saying no. "Closed this morning," he said. "Funny," I told him. "I'm the air inspector. I hear something in there stopped breathing." He didn't smile. He did glance down at my driver's license, which I had produced with the speed of a Broadway magician. When he saw the name, the polite wall bent an inch. Doors in New York are like people. If you press the right bruise, they open. "Police are inside," he said, stepping aside. "Terrific." I was hoping for the social version. The lobby smelled of polished wood and old secrets. I followed the line of noise. Low voices, a clatter of somebody moving furniture they weren't paying for, and found it at the foot of a stairway leading to a mezzanine lounge. 2 uniforms were standing there, and one of them looked like he had been born suspicious. "Private," he said. "Sure," I said. "So is my dentist's office. Doesn't stop me when I've got an appointment." He took another look at the license, then at my face as if he might find a disguise seam. Nero Wolfe's man. Some days, today especially. The uniform sighed like a man who'd already been warned about Wolfe's lawyers and didn't want the training seminar. He nodded me through. Upstairs, the Arcturus Lounge was the kind of place where people sit in chairs that are too expensive to be comfortable, pretending to enjoy it. A bar ran along one wall with more brass than a military parade. The lights were low enough to flatter everybody except the living. Right now, they were doing their worst with a body. Lennox Hale was on a couch near the back, laid out with a neatness that suggested a professional touch. A sheet, covered him from chest down, leaving his face visible, long, refined, a shade paler than the newspapers probably preferred. His eyes were closed like he had decided to wait this out. A plainclothes detective stood beside the couch making notes. He had a tired jaw, and the kind of mustache that grows out of men who've seen too much and don't see the point of shaving for it. He looked up when I came in. "Goodwin," he said, not asking. "You work for Wolfe." "Sometimes I work for my lunch. Right now, yes." "Stark," he said. "Homicide." I knew Stark the way you know a subway line you don't like but can't avoid. Not close friends, but enough mutual irritation to qualify as an acquaintance. "Sorry about your quiet night," I said. He snorted. "If you're here, I can stop pretending it was going to be quiet anyway." "What's Wolfe want?" "Information. Same as you, only he likes it vacuum sealed. What's the official story so far?" "Official story is we don't have one." Stark nodded toward Hale. "Found around 12:30 by the manager. Locked room. Hale's private tasting room off the mezzanine. No sign of a struggle, no weapon, no note. He was alone. Cause? Not the fun kind." Stark lowered his voice a notch. "No visible trauma. Mouth had a little froth, but that could mean anything. We're waiting on tox. Could be poison, could be a heart event, could be something that walked in wearing Sunday shoes and left without leaving tracks. Any witnesses to him going in alone?" "Manager says Hale came downstairs from the tasting around 10, talked to him 2 minutes, went back up alone. Their guests had left already. He was on his phone, then he asked for the room to be closed off. Standard club courtesy. We'll verify." I leaned on the back of a chair and let my eyes work. There were 5 place settings at a low table near the couch, glasses rinsed but still with cloudy traces, saucers, a sugar bowl, little silver spoons. A tray held several squat bottles, some clear, some green, one almost black. Labels looked old and smug. "The tasting was here?" I asked. "Yeah, those are Hale's own bottles." Stark stared at them like they might leap. "Any of the 4 guests still around?" "No. We've got names and addresses from the valet book. They're on our list. Before you ask, yes, your client is on it." "Mrs. Wynne isn't my client yet. She's Wolfe's potential ulcer." "Same thing." Stark scratched his mustache. "Look, Goodwin, tell Wolfe to stay in his chair. We don't need him poking around a homicide. If Mrs. Wynne has something to say, she can say it to us." "Sure, and if you want orchids to confess, you can say it to Theodore." He didn't bite. "We got enough trouble without Wolfe turning this into a parlor game." "It's not a game when a man's dead and a woman gets a threat," I said. His eyes sharpened. "What threat?" "Oh, you don't know about that. That's adorable." I let that hang for half a second because Stark hates being behind the curve. "She got a typed note this morning. Somebody thinks she drank what belonged to her and has to return it tonight or be mourned tomorrow. That phrase ring any bells with your corpse there?" Stark stared at me, then swore softly. "Why didn't she bring it to us?" "You'll have to ask her, but I'm guessing she likes explanations before she gives her life to the city." He grimaced. "Give Wolfe my number. I want that note. I'll tell him you asked nicely in your own way." Stark stepped closer to the tasting table. "You touch nothing." "I'm developing a reputation for not touching corpses today," I said. "But I'm looking. If I look too hard, blink twice." He didn't blink. He did look uneasy, which in a cop is as good as a door opening. I bent to the bottles without picking one up, just reading what I could. Most of the labels were in French, one in Czech, one plain enough to be homemade. The dark bottle that Mrs. Wynne had mentioned sat a little apart. Its label was almost gone, but there was a faint crest. Maybe a bird, maybe a star, the kind of thing a drunk historian would tattoo. Beside it lay a small card in Hale's tidy handwriting, La dernière haleine, the last breath. I straightened slowly, feeling the case click into a new notch. Hale had named the bottle. Somebody else had named the threat. And now Hale was the one who had given up the breath for good. I looked at Stark. That dark bottle, has anyone logged it? He frowned. We're photographing. Why? Because that label says, La dernière haleine, I told him, which means your dead man was playing the same poetic game as whoever wrote my note. Stark swore again, louder this time. Christ, get out of here before I decide you're contaminating my scene with vocabulary. Already going, I said, but I'm taking the phrase to someone who knows what to do with it. I headed for the stairs, and the room seemed colder behind me. Outside, the sky had the washed-out look of a city trying to appear innocent. I had a bottle named for a last breath, 4 suspects with good reasons not to confess, and a woman marked on a countdown. And Wolfe was sitting at home, waiting for me to bring him the hinge. I got back to the brownstone with my coat smelling faintly of old liquor and newer trouble. Fritz took my hat and gave me the once-over. That means he'd like to ask questions, but knows better than to start with me when Wolfe is in the house. I went straight to the office. Mrs. Wynne was still there, standing by the window as if she had decided the street owed her an explanation. Wolfe sat in his chair behind the desk, hands on the armrests, face arranged into that patient disapproval he uses when the world insists on being messy on his schedule. Well, he said. I tossed my jacket over the back of my chair and sat. Lennox Hale is definitely dead, and the police are definitely in residence. Stark's running it. He's trying to pretend it's a simple homicide, which means it isn't. No visible trauma. Locked room set up. They're waiting on toxicology. Mrs. Wynne turned from the window. Locked room? According to Stark, yes. Hale went back upstairs alone after your party left. Told the manager to close off the tasting room. Door was locked when they found him around 12:30. Her eyes didn't widen so much as narrow. That's a useful difference. So someone had a key, or he let them in. Or the lock is lying, I said. New York locks do that. Wolfe's fingers came together lightly. And the phrase? That's the hinge. I leaned forward. On the tasting table, there was a card in Hale's handwriting next to the dark bottle. He'd labeled it La dernière haleine. Mrs. Wynne went very still. Wolfe didn't. He frowned, not a big theatrical frown, just the tightening of a man who sees a pattern forming where he doesn't like it. The last breath, he murmured. Exactly. So Hale himself was calling that bottle the last breath, which matches your anonymous typist's poetry. Stark didn't know about your note. He does now. He wants it. He will not get it until I am finished with it, Wolfe said. Mrs. Wynne's voice came out low. Lennox told us that phrase, the drink that stole her final breath, as a sort of theatrical tease. I thought it was just flourish. Flourish is often the wrapper for intent, Wolfe said. Tell me, Mrs. Wynne, at any point during the tasting did Mr. Hale leave the room besides the 10 minutes you mentioned? No. Did any of the others? She considered carefully. Ashford went to take a call once. Perhaps 5 minutes. Kremer excused himself to the lavatory near the end. Dr. Morell remained throughout. Wolfe nodded as if he'd placed each fact on a shelf he knew by heart. And Mr. Hale supervised the final bottle personally. Yes. That implies he regarded it as special, possibly dangerous, possibly valuable, possibly both. I said, Stark will be rattling his cages right about now. If Tox comes back on absinthe, he'll start rounding up your guests. Wolfe's eyes moved to the note on his blotter. He will do that in any case. But I'm less interested in what killed Hale than in why someone believes you, specifically you, must return something tonight. Mrs. Wynne lifted her chin. I didn't take anything. I accept that as your belief, Wolfe said. It may not be the killer's belief. The language of the note is personal, almost accusatory. Yet it is typed, detached, theatrical. That combination suggests a mind that enjoys performance but fears identification. One of your circle may fit it. I watched her. She wasn't frightened now. She was angry. Angry is good. It keeps people alive long enough to be useful. I asked, "Do you know of any woman in Hale's past who could be referred to as her in a story about absinthe?" She shook her head. Lennox had admirers, some sincere, some strategic. None who died recently. And he wasn't sentimental. If there was a tragedy attached to that bottle, he would have treated it as a collectible feature, not a wound. "Unless it was his wound," I said. Wolfe gave me a sideways look that meant, "Don't get poetic, Archie. That's my department." He said, "We must know the history of that bottle, not the folklore of absinthe generally. Mrs. Wynne, I'm aware of its reputation for hallucination and moral decay, but the specific history Hale attached to it." "How?" she asked. "By asking those who were present," Wolfe said. "They were there for the performance. One of them may know the script." I leaned back. "You want me to go calling on Ashford, Kremer, and Morell?" "Precisely. Begin with Dr. Morell. She's the closest to Hale, and science lends itself to toxins and to stories. After that, Mr. Kremer, who listens. Finally, Mr. Ashford, who talks." Mrs. Wynne said, "They'll tell you nothing if the police have already spoken to them." "On the contrary," Wolfe replied, "they will tell you something different if I ask. People are rarely consistent between authorities." I stood. "I'll head for Morell first." Wolfe lifted a hand. "Not yet. There is an additional matter." His eyes rested on Mrs. Wynne. "You have been threatened with a deadline tonight. You will not go home." Her jaw tightened. "Mr. Wolfe, I do not issue requests," he said mildly. "I issue conditions. You will remain here under my roof, where Fritz and Mr. Goodwin and I can control access. If the threat is genuine, it will be addressed here. If it is a stratagem, it will be revealed by your safety." She stared at him a moment, then looked at me. I said, "If somebody wants you scared and alone, the one thing you shouldn't do is give them the scenery. Wolfe's right. Also, Fritz cooks better than your place." That got a flicker of something in her face, a reluctant concession, maybe even gratitude. She sat again, slowly. "Very well," she said. "But I want this ended before dawn." "So do I," Wolfe said. The bell on the front door rang then, sharp, insistent, not Fritz's dinner bell, but the city's. Fritz appeared a moment later with a look that said the world had pushed into the hall without taking off its shoes. "Inspector Kramer is here, Mr. Wolfe." Wolfe closed his eyes for half a second, as if savoring annoyance like a vintage. "Show him in," he said. I didn't move. Neither did Mrs. Wynne. The game had just added a dealer, and I wanted to see what cards he brought. Kramer came in like he owned the air and was considering charging rent. Inspector Kramer had that built-in scowl New York issues to men who keep trying to stop other men from killing each other. His overcoat looked dragged through 3 boroughs, and his hat was tilted the way a hat gets when its owner has used it to express opinions. He saw Mrs. Wynne first, then me, then Wolfe. His scowl developed a nuance. "Morning," I said. "Don't start," growled. He went straight to Wolfe's desk without waiting to be invited, because waiting is not Kramer's hobby. "All right, Wolfe. What's this I hear about you sheltering my witness and poking around my homicide?" Wolfe didn't even blink. "Good morning, Inspector. Sit down." "Hell with sitting down." Kramer jabbed a thumb toward Mrs. Wynne. "She got a note. You didn't call it in. You didn't hand over the note, and your boy was at the scene 10 minutes after we got there. That's 3 strikes before breakfast." Wolfe folded his hands on his stomach, the picture of a man who has never felt hurried in his life. "I'm flattered you keep score, Inspector, but you do not make rules in my house." Kramer's eyes narrowed. "You want to go for 4? "If you insist." Wolfe turned his head slightly toward Mrs. Wynne. Madame, this is Inspector Kramer. He's earnest and persistent, and in the end he is useful. She gave Kramer a cool nod. Inspector. Kramer's attention stuck on her like a burr. Mrs. Wynne, you were at Hale's tasting last night. You got a threat this morning. You didn't tell us. I told Mr. Wolfe, she said. I intend to tell you once I understand what it concerns. You don't get to set the schedule, lady. A man's dead. And I'm alive, for the moment. I prefer to keep it that way. Kramer opened his mouth, probably to say something blunt enough to pass for a civic duty, but Wolfe got there first. Inspector, Wolfe said, you are agitated. That is understandable, but your agitation will not help you. It will, however, entertain me if prolonged. Do you wish to be helpful or entertaining? I wish you'd stay out of it. Then you will be disappointed. Wolfe nodded toward the note on the blotter. You may read it. Kramer snatched it the way a dog thinks about a steak. He read, lips moving. When he finished, he let out a breath through his nose like steam through a radiator. Tonight, he said. Return it tonight. What the hell does that mean? That, Wolfe said placidly, is what we intend to discover. Meanwhile, Mrs. Wynne remains here. Kramer slammed the note on the desk. No, she does not. She comes with me. She's a material witness and maybe a suspect. Mrs. Wynne didn't move. On what grounds? On the grounds there's a dead man who invited you to a private tasting and then wound up in the morgue. That's enough for me till I have more. Wolfe's voice got a shade softer. That's when it gets dangerous. Inspector, I suggest you reconsider. If you remove her, you satisfy the author of that note, who wants her isolated and frightened. If you leave her, you deprive him of that advantage. Unless, of course, you believe you are the only protection she needs. Kramer glared. I can put a detail on her, which will not prevent a subtle poisoning, an anonymous delivery, or a bullet from an alley, and it will not prevent a scandal. Are you prepared to have your officers camped in the home of a woman whose name is a headline waiting to happen? Kramer cursed. He wasn't stupid. He was just allergic to being outmaneuvered in Wolfe's office. I don't like it, he said finally. You're not required to. Wolfe smiled faintly. You are required to do your job. I will do mine. We occasionally overlap. Kramer shoved his hands into his coat pockets to keep from doing something theatrical. All right, she stays, for now. But I want her statement. Here. Now. I will provide it, Mrs. Wynne said, with Mr. Goodwin present, and I want a copy of anything you learn about Lennox Hale's death. That's not how it works. It can be, Wolfe said. Kramer shot him a look. You got Saul Panzer on speed dial, don't you? I have Mr. Panzer on competence dial, Wolfe said serenely. But if you wish to accelerate matters, yes, I will involve him. Kramer chewed that, then grudgingly nodded at me. Fine. Goodwin, you stay and take notes. I'll get a formal statement, and then you stop wandering into my crime scenes. I do my best wandering where it's useful, I said. He ignored me. He started asking Mrs. Wynne questions, times, names, what she drank, where she sat, whether she touched any bottles, whether Hale looked ill, whether anyone argued. She answered with the crisp precision of a woman who keeps her calendar in her head and her emotions behind glass. I took notes because Wolfe wanted me to, and also because Kramer was right about one thing. The man was dead, and the truth wouldn't come cheaper later. When Kramer was done, he stood there in the middle of the office, looking like a man deciding whether to leave quietly or make a point. You boys find out something, he said, aiming it at Wolfe, but looking at me. You call me. Right away. Not after you've played chess in here till midnight. Wolfe inclined his head. If it is relevant to your inquiry, yes. If it ain't relevant to my inquiry, it's still relevant to my patients. Your patience is not my province. Kramer's jaw worked, and then he turned for the door. Halfway there he stopped and looked back at Mrs. Wynne. Don't do anything dumb, he said. If somebody calls you or sends you something, you tell me. She nodded in a way that said she understood the instruction and resented the tone. He left. The house exhaled. I set my pencil down. Well, that was cozy. Wolfe's eyes were on the note again. Cozy? No. Useful? Yes. The police are now aware of the threat, which means the author must alter his expectations. Mrs. Wynne's hands were clasped tightly in her lap. You think he'll act anyway? I think, Wolfe said, that he has already acted once. He killed Lennox Hale. We must assume he is capable of acting again. The question is, why did he kill Hale before? Collecting his return. I said, maybe Hale was the one who was supposed to return it. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe someone decided to make an example. Wolfe looked at me thoughtfully. Possibly. Or perhaps Hale's death was not the objective, but the consequence. The night's performance may have been arranged to produce a victim and a scapegoat. Mrs. Wynne lifted her head. Scapegoat. Wolfe met her eyes. Yes, you. The word sat there like a glass set down too hard. I stood. Okay, I'll go see Dr. Morell before Kramer changes his mind and puts a tail on me, too. Wolfe nodded. Proceed. And Archie? Yeah. Be observant. A woman of science who dabbles in romance and rare spirits may also dabble in murder. I grinned. That's why you keep me around. I dabble professionally. I grabbed my coat, and as I went out, I heard Wolfe's chair creak. Just a whisper, as he settled deeper, not into comfort, but into calculation. Behind me, a threatened woman sat in a silent house. A dead man waited for toxicology to explain him, and somewhere in the city, a bottle called The Last Breath was making everybody breathe a little faster than they wanted. Dr. Yvette Morell lived in a narrow building on the east side that tried hard to look respectable, despite the fact that it rented its top floors to people who insisted on doing things like molecular research in a room the size of a dog run. The lobby smelled of bleach and old cooking, which is New York's way of saying, don't ask questions you can't afford to answer. I rode up with a lady carrying a poodle in a sweater and a man carrying a chessboard, and I figured that covered the local demographics. Morell answered the door on the second knock, fast enough to make me wonder if she hadn't been waiting behind it. She was in her late 30s, maybe 40, with a sharp face framed by short, dark curls that looked as if they had been argued into place. Her eyes were bright and tired at the same time, the scientist's special. She wore a gray sweater and black pants and no makeup, as if the morning had gotten in first and she had decided not to fight. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. Her accent put velvet on the consonants. "I expected the police, not you." "Consider me the police's more attractive cousin," I said. "May I come in?" She hesitated just a fraction too long, then stepped aside. "Of course. You are from Mr. Wolfe." "Right. He sends his regards and his suspicion." That got a flash of amusement. Thin, quick, then gone. The apartment was tidy in the way a lab is tidy. Everything in its place because chaos is expensive. Books on one side, a small dining table on the other, and on the counter, a row of glass vials that made me keep my hands in my pockets. She didn't offer coffee. People who don't offer coffee either don't trust you or have no coffee. Morell looked like she had plenty of both and trusted neither. "You came. About Lennox," she said. "Among other things. You heard? Inspector Kramer called an hour ago. He asked the usual questions badly." She crossed her arms. "Lennox is dead. It is absurd." "Absurd tends to be popular in homicide," I said. "Let me do my usual questions better. Last night, after the tasting ended, what did Lennox do?" He apologized for the interruption. He said the club required something of him. He offered to continue another time. "We left." She said it cleanly, like reading a lab report. "Did he look upset?" "Annoyed, not afraid." "Did he say why the commotion downstairs mattered?" "No, only that it did." She watched me. Is that relevant? Everything's relevant until you can prove it isn't. I leaned against the wall near the door, not trapping her, just making the geometry honest. Mrs. Wynne got a note this morning. A threat. It used a phrase Lennox used last night. Her nostrils flared faintly. The last breath nonsense. Nonsense with a body attached now. He called the final bottle the drink that stole her final breath. And on the tasting table he'd labeled it La Dernière Haleine. She stared at me a beat, then turned away and went to the counter. She picked up a glass of water, drank half of it, and set it down with too much care. He was proud of that bottle, she said finally. Too proud. Like a boy with a firecracker. So you knew the story? A pause. Yes. Tell it to me like I'm 5 and Wolfe is 60. She gave a short laugh that didn't have a lot of humor in it. It is not a fairy tale. It is a legend attached to a particular absinthe, one that was made in Pontarlier before the ban. Lennox said it came from a distiller named Giroux. He claimed a woman, an actress, a courtesan, who knows, drank it before a performance in 1891. She collapsed on stage and died within minutes. The rumor was that the absinthe was adulterated. Copper salts, antimony, something to make it greener, stronger. They said it stole her breath. The bottle became infamous. Collectors called it La Dernière Haleine. I whistled softly. So last breath was literally last breath. Literally and theatrically. She looked at me sharply. Lennox liked theater. He liked danger packaged as history. Did he say the woman's name? She shook her head. He never knew, or he pretended not to. The story was more important than the facts. Anyone else there know it? She hesitated. That fraction again. I told them a little. When Lennox brought out the bottle, I explained why it was famous. Ashford made jokes. Kremer listened. Mrs. Wynne said nothing. Could any of them have known it independently? Kremer, maybe. He is a man who studies taste like religion. He might have heard of it. Her mouth tightened. Ashford. He knows only what makes him sound clever. You and Lennox were close, I said. It wasn't a question. She didn't pretend it was. Yes, she said quietly. We were. Close enough to have keys to his private room at the Arcturus Club? Her eyes snapped up. No, Lennox didn't give keys. He liked to be the one who opened doors. Still, he was found in a locked room. Somebody got in. Her jaw set. You think I killed him? I think you're on the list with 4 other people, and I'm trying to take you off it if I can. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she said, I did not kill him. I left the club at 9, as you know. I went home. I was in my lab until midnight. There are security logs, cameras. Check them. I will. I filed that away. Alibis don't help if they're too crisp, but they're a start. What about the bottle? I asked. Did Lennox let anyone else handle it? She frowned. No, he poured it. He resealed it himself. He put it away in his case. Could someone have tampered with it earlier? Switch, poison, add something? She lifted a shoulder. Absinthe is ethanol and essential oils. You can add many things without changing the taste if you are skilled. But why? You could poison a man without such a circus, unless the circus is the point. That was a Wolfe sentence, almost word for word. I watched her a second longer. She was angry, grieving, and afraid of being framed, all in the same cup. It's a dangerous blend. One more thing, I said. This threat to Mrs. Wynne says she has to return it tonight. If it is the bottle, why her? She didn't take it. Morell's face went hard. Because Lennox made her drink from the bottle. A man like Lennox liked to make women taste what he considered rare. She was the richest audience there. He wanted her all. Or her involvement, I said. If someone wanted a scapegoat. She looked at me with sudden hostility. Then you should look at the ones who resent her. Ashford, Kremer, even Lennox sometimes. He admired her, but he liked to win people. Win them to what? She opened her mouth, closed it. Then she said, to his cause, his collection, his vanity, whatever you call it. Okay. I pushed off the wall. You're going to get a visit from the police again. Maybe today. Maybe with handcuffs if they're feeling dramatic. Keep your timeline straight. Keep your lab logs. And keep your hands off any more legendary spirits. Her eyes followed me to the door. Mr. Goodwin, Lennox was not careless. If he is dead because of that bottle, it means someone wanted the story to repeat. I'll tell Wolfe, I said. Outside, the hall felt narrower than before. I took the stairs because elevators give you too much time to think. The story had a woman who died in 1891, a bottle that made collectors salivate in 2025, and a modern man dead in a locked room before anyone could return anything. If someone wanted the story to repeat, they were counting on people to behave like characters in a legend. Wolfe hates legends. He prefers facts. I headed back to give him some. I made it back to the brownstone in time to catch Fritz on the stairs with a tray that smelled like duty and parsley. He gave me a look over the rim of it. You found something, Archie. I found a legend with teeth. Save me a plate. He shook his head the way a man does when he knows a house is about to get noisier. I went on to the office. Wolfe was alone when I came in. Mrs. Wynne had been sent upstairs to the south bedroom on the second floor. For her comfort, Wolfe had said, which in that language also means for my control. He sat at his desk with a book open on a stand and a second volume beside him, as if the morning homicide had been inconvenient enough to send him to reference works for solace. Well, he said without looking up. I dropped into my chair. Dr. Morell knows the story. She claims Hale's bottle was a pre-ban absinthe from Pontarlier, distiller Giroux, famous because a woman, unknown name, maybe actress or courtesan, drank it before a performance in 1891 and collapsed on stage. Rumor was it was adulterated to intensify color or kick. Collectors called it La Dernière Haleine. Wolfe looked up now. His eyes gleamed the way they do when a theory gets one of its bones. And Morell's attitude. Sharp, grieving, defensive. She says she left at 9, worked in her lab till midnight, has logs and cameras. She insists Hale wasn't careless, and if he's dead because of the bottle, someone wanted the story to repeat. I'd say she's frightened of being framed more than she's hiding guilt, but don't quote me on a tombstone. Wolfe grunted softly, pleased with the data, but already chewing on what it implied. So the phrase is not an invention of last night. Hale was trafficking in a known legend. Known to collectors, maybe. Not to Mrs. Wynne. Morell told them a bit at the table. Ashford joked. Kremer listened. That's her take. Wolfe's fingers tapped once on the blotter. The bottle's notoriety is essential. A killer who uses a legend expects others to recognize it. That narrows the field to those who knew it, or those who learned it at the tasting. Which is the 4 guests and Hale himself. Or someone who overheard. Wolfe leaned back a millimeter, which on him is a stretch. The Arcturus Club maintains staff, a waiter, a bartender, a manager. The interruption downstairs may not be incidental. It may be the door through which the killer entered the tableau. I said, Morell didn't say what the interruption was, only that Hale went down, came back annoyed, and ended the tasting early. Annoyed is not afraid. If Hale had been threatened then, he would have shown it. Since he did not, perhaps he was merely lured. I nodded. You want me to see Kremer next? Not yet. Wolfe reached for the bell and gave it a decisive press. When Fritz appeared, Wolfe said, Bring Mrs. Wynne down, please. And Fritz, if Mr. Saul Panzer calls, put him through immediately. Fritz went. I raised an eyebrow. You called Saul. I did not need to. He will call. He always does when there is prey in the air. That was Wolfe. translating the world into a hunting metaphor without leaving his chair. I waited. Mrs. Wynne came in a few minutes later, composed but tight around the eyes. She sat in the red leathered chair this time, which told me the south bedroom hadn't soothed her much. "Mr. Goodwin has learned the origin of the phrase," Wolfe said, and summarized the 1891 story in 2 neat sentences. "It is a collector's legend attached to the absinthe that concluded your tasting. That legend is not about metaphor. It is about poison." Mrs. Wynne's lips compressed. Then Lennox was courting death as a hobby. Possibly. Or someone was courting his death. She looked at me. "Dr. Morell told you this?" "Yes. She also says you were the richest audience, which may be why Hale insisted you drink from it." "I didn't insist on anything," Mrs. Wynne said. Lennox offered. I accepted. It was a sip. "A sip is enough with the right compound," Wolfe said. The phone rang before she could retort. Fritz brought it to Wolfe, who took it with the leisure of a man accepting a dessert menu. "Panzer?" "Yes." A pause. Wolfe's eyes shifted to the far wall as he listened. "The Arcturus Club." Continue." "No, do not confront him. Observe." Another pause. Wolfe's eyelids lowered slightly. "Interesting. Tell me precisely what you learned about the bottle." He listened a few seconds more, then said, "Good. Come here at once." He hung up. I leaned forward. "What's Saul got?" Wolfe regarded me as if considering whether to let Christmas come early. "He has confirmed that Lennox Hale acquired the bottle recently. It was not part of his collection until 3 weeks ago. He bought it through a private broker who specializes in illicit pre-banned spirits. That broker is Silas Creamer." Mrs. Wynne's head turned sharply. "Creamer, the restaurateur?" "Yes." Wolfe's voice was calm, but the air in the room wasn't. Mr. Creamer did not attend merely as a guest. He had a professional interest in the bottle and in Hale's use of it. I said, "So the seller sits at the table to watch the buyer pour. That's cozy too." "Or controlling," Wolfe said. "If Creamer sold Hale a notorious absinthe under the name La Dernière Helene, he knew its story. He may have expected Hale to tell it. He may have expected someone else to hear it. He may even have arranged for the story to be reenacted." Mrs. Wynne's voice came thin. "You're suggesting he sold poison?" "I am suggesting nothing final," Wolfe said. "I'm arranging pieces. But note the sequence. Hale acquires the bottle from Creamer. He stages a tasting, including 3 people connected to him and 1 wealthy widow with public stature. He teases a legend about a fatal drink. He is interrupted downstairs. He ends the evening early. He is found dead within 3 hours. You receive a threat using the legend's language." She sat back, jaw set. "You think I was invited to be accused?" Wolfe met her eyes. "You were invited to be involved. Accusation may have been the intended second act." "Why me?" "Because you are visible," I said. "A scapegoat needs an audience." Wolfe gave me a faint approving grunt. "And because your refusal to be frightened is likely to provoke the killer into error. He expected panic. He got this house instead." She didn't look comforted. She looked like someone being forced to play a role in a play she never auditioned for. "Saul's coming here," Wolfe said. "We will hear more. Archie, you will go to see Mr. Creamer now. Not to accuse. To observe and to elicit, if possible, the nature of his relationship with Hale and his knowledge of the bottle." "Got it." Wolfe's gaze flicked to Mrs. Wynne. "Madame, there is also the matter of returning something tonight. We must decide what that something is." She said tightly, "It's not in my possession." "That may not matter." Wolfe's voice had the quiet of a trap being set. "The killer may believe it is, or he may require a symbolic return, an apology, a payment, a confession. If he requires theater, he may come to the stage." "The stage being your brownstone?" I said. "Precisely." Wolfe looked almost pleased. "Therefore, we will make it ready." I stood to go, and as I reached for my coat, the bell out front rang again. Fritz went to answer. A second later, his voice drifted back, careful but edged. "Mr. Saul Panzer is here, Mr. Wolfe, and another gentleman who says he must see you at once. Mr. Brent Ashford." Wolfe's eyebrows lifted in that caterpillar way. He glanced at me, then at Mrs. Wynne, and set his hands on the armrests like a man settling into a show he had not bothersomely paid for, but is determined to direct. "Show them both in," he said. "The day accelerates." Ashford came in first because men like Brent Ashford always make sure they arrive before the story can do without them. He was dressed like a magazine ad for expensive disappointment. Perfect suit, perfect hair, eyes that slid around looking for mirrors. Saul Panzer followed, compact and quiet, with the air of a man who had already done the dangerous part of the day and was annoyed it hadn't ended there. Ashford saw Mrs. Wynne and stopped short, then recovered too quickly. "Cora, thank God. I didn't know—" He turned to Wolfe. "Mr. Wolfe, I'm Brent Ashford. Lennox Hale was my friend. I understand you're involved." Wolfe didn't so much as offer a nod. "Mr. Ashford, sit down." Ashford sat in the red chair like he'd been assigned it by a stage. Manager. Saul took the yellow without being told. I stayed behind my desk and watched the faces. "You came here voluntarily," Wolfe said to Ashford. "That is unusual. Explain." Ashford ran a hand over his knee, smoothing fabric that needed no smoothing. "The police questioned me. They implied all sorts of things. Then I heard Mrs. Wynne had received a threat and had come to you. I thought Lennox trusted you. He said if trouble ever came, you'd make sense of it. I want this cleared up. For his sake. And for mine." "For yours," Wolfe repeated. Ashford blinked rapidly. "Well, yes. I don't want to be dragged into scandal over a tasting evening." "Scandal is the least of your dangers," Wolfe said. "Tell me exactly what occurred when you went to take your call." Ashford frowned as if trying to remember a reason he once lied about. "I stepped into the hall. I called my office. 2 minutes. When I returned, Dr. Morell was talking about the history of the last bottle. That's all." "You did not go downstairs?" "No." "You did not speak with any staff?" "Of course not." Wolfe nodded, filed it, and turned to Saul. "Report." Saul's voice was quiet enough to make people lean in. "Kremer runs a little import side hustle through one of his restaurant groups. He's the private broker Hale used, like you said. I talked to a guy who's sold to Kremer before. Kremer's been looking for something called La Dernière Haleine for years. He finally got it from a European estate auction, unlisted lot. He paid heavy and brought it in through Montreal. Hale paid heavier." Wolfe didn't blink. Was Kremer aware of its legend? He was the one advertising it to collectors with that story. The rumor's his selling point. Mrs. Wynne's fingers tightened on the chair arms. Ashford's eyes shifted to her, then away. Wolfe said, "Thank you, Archie. You will not need to go to Kremer now. He will come to us." "As in you're inviting him here?" "As in he's already invited." Wolfe reached for the phone and dialed. He wasn't fast. He rarely is. But it is remarkable how quickly the world answers when Wolfe calls with his voice like a velvet hammer. "Mr. Kremer, Nero Wolfe, you will come to my office at 4 o'clock. You will also contact Dr. Morell and ask her to be here at the same time. Mr. Ashford is already present. You may choose to be punctual or to be compelled. Good afternoon." He hung up, then looked at me. "Call Kramer. Tell him to be here at 4 as well." I called. Kramer grumbled something about wolves and traps and said he'd be here. I hung up and looked at Wolfe. "That's a full house." "It must be," Wolfe said. "The final act requires all players." Ashford shifted. "Final act?" Wolfe ignored him, eyes on Mrs. Wynne. "Madame, one question before our guests arrive. When Hale was interrupted downstairs, did he say who needed him? No, only that he must attend to a club matter. Did he leave his case with the bottles upstairs? Yes, it was on the sideboard. Was it there when you left? Yes. Wolfe nodded, satisfied. He leaned back. At 4 o'clock, the office was a jury box and a theatre rolled into one. Kramer stood near the door with his hat in his hand and a face that said he'd rather be chewing nails. Dr. Morell sat straight-backed, hands folded. Silas Creamer arrived last, which fit him. He was a thick-set man in his early 50s with a chef's shoulders and an accountant's eyes. He wore a charcoal coat that didn't quite disguise how ready he was to push someone into a kitchen fire if they insulted his palate. He looked at Mrs. Wynne, then at Ashford, then at Wolfe, and understood in 1 second that he had walked into something not on his menu. "Well," he said, "this is dramatic." "No," Wolfe said. "It is logical. Sit down." Cremer took the remaining chair without arguing, but his jaw was tight. The room settled. Wolfe said quietly, "Lennox Hale is dead, likely from poisoning. Mrs. Wynne has been threatened with death unless she returns something tonight. The language of the threat is derived from the legend attached to the absinthe bottle that concluded your tasting. That bottle was sold to Hale by Mr. Cremer. Do you all accept these facts?" Kramer barked, "We accept nothing until you point fingers." Wolfe's eyes flicked to him. "Then be silent and watch. You may arrest later." Kramer grunted but didn't interrupt. Wolfe turned to Cremer. "Mr. Cremer, you sold Hale a bottle you called La Dernière Haleine. You marketed it with a story about a woman dying from it in 1891. You knew Hale intended to stage a tasting and repeat that story to impress his guests, including Mrs. Wynne. Correct?" Kramer's face hardened. "I sold him a rare spirit. The history is part of its provenance. Collectors want context." "Collectors want myths," Wolfe corrected. "You supplied one, but you also supplied something else. The bottle you sold Hale was genuine in age and scarcity, yet its contents were not what you claimed." Cremer leaned forward. "What the hell are you talking about? Yesterday, Hale poured from that bottle and none of the 4 guests suffered immediate harm. Yet Hale died within hours. Therefore, the poison that killed him was not in the absinthe he served to you. It was introduced later." Morell frowned. Ashford looked relieved too quickly. Cremer's eyes narrowed. Wolfe continued. "Hale went downstairs during the tasting because he received a message, a lure. The messenger was likely someone he trusted in club matters. That message brought him to a private room downstairs for 10 minutes. When he returned, he ended the evening early. Not from fear, but from annoyance at being compelled. However, in those 10 minutes he drank something presented as part of club courtesy. Perhaps a toast, perhaps a special follow-up to the tasting. And that drink was poisoned." Kramer said, "We don't have talks yet." "You will," Wolfe said. "Meanwhile, I observe human behavior." He looked at Ashford. "Mr. Ashford, you have been anxious since entering this room. You came here not to mourn Hale, but to protect yourself from implication. You are ambitious, yes, but ambition alone is not murder. Your motive is weak, your opportunity uncertain, and your fear is loud. Therefore, you are not the killer." Ashford exhaled and tried to look noble about it. It didn't take. Wolfe turned to Morell. "Dr. Morell, your grief is real. Your alibi appears strong. Your scientific mind could devise poison, but your emotions would have betrayed you more clearly if you had used it. You are not the killer." Morell's chin lifted. A mix of pride and pain crossed her face. Wolfe's gaze settled on Cremer like a weight. "Mr. Cremer, you are the only one who profited directly from the bottle's legend. You acquired it at great cost, transported it at risk, and sold it to Hale at a price inflated by that very myth. When Hale staged his tasting, he intended to reveal something after the final pour, the full story, but he was interrupted. By whom? You. Kremer's mouth opened, but Wolfe rolled on, voice unhurried and lethal. You knew Hale had discovered your fraud. Not in the bottle itself, it was real, but in your marketing of it. The legend you sold him with it was not merely a story, it was a clue. Hale learned that the original 1891 death was not caused by absinthe at all. It was a theater murder using a poisoned cordial served after a show. He intended to tell that at the tasting, to display his erudition, and to ridicule your myth for profit. But you found out. You had a contact at the Arcturus Club, the manager who handles private rooms for special members. You sent Hale downstairs under pretext, offered him a complimentary digestive, a small, elegant drink suited to a man who had just drunk absinthe, and you poisoned it. You then locked his private room when he later went upstairs alone, ensuring the appearance of a locked room death. Kremer's face went red under the skin, then gray beneath the red. That's insane. It is precise, Wolfe said. You used a poison swift enough to strike within 3 hours, slow enough not to interrupt the tasting. You chose one that mimics cardiac or respiratory collapse, perhaps digitalis or aconitine. Dr. Morell will suggest others. You expected the legend to point to the bottle and to Mrs. Wynne as a scapegoat because she was the richest witness and the easiest headline. Mrs. Wynne's breath hissed out. So the note was to push me into confessing to something I didn't do. Or to provoke you into returning the bottle to you, back to Mr. Kremer, Wolfe said. He wished the evidence reclaimed and the story restored to its profitable mystery. The note's deadline was theater. It depended on panic. Kramer stepped forward. You got proof? Wolfe turned his head. Inspector, you will find that Hale's digestive drink downstairs was served from the club's courtesy tray, delivered by the manager. You will also find, in Mr. Creamer's restaurant import records, a small vial of herbal tonic not declared to customs. You will also find that Hale, meticulous as he was, wrote a note last night after returning upstairs, likely in his private room, about your fraud, Mr. Kremer. He had time before he died. That note is either in his pocket, his briefcase, or his safe at home. You should look. Kremer sprang up, but Kramer was faster. 2 steps, a hand on Kremer's shoulder that meant iron. Sit down, Kramer said. You're coming with me. Kremer's eyes flicked around the room like a trapped animal's. You can't. This is all talk. Wolfe looked at him without warmth. Talk is how truth reveals itself when men are proud enough to stage their own undoing. Kremer's shoulders sagged a notch. He was going to ruin me, he said hoarsely. He called it fraud. He said he'd tell them all, laugh at me. Years of work on a collection, on a reputation, gone because he wanted to show off. So you killed him, Kramer said. Kremer's mouth twisted. He drank what he mocked. Kramer hauled him up. Save it for the DA. They went. The door shut. The brownstone felt quieter immediately, the way it does after a storm steps outside. Morell sat with her hands clenched, eyes shiny but steady. Ashford looked like he'd just escaped a bad review. Mrs. Wynne had not moved at all, but the tightness in her shoulders was shifting toward control again. She said softly, You were right to keep me here. Wolfe nodded once. You were right to come. She stood. Lennox, did he suffer? Wolfe's voice gentled a fraction. His end was swift. His vanity prolonged his danger, not his pain. She took that in as if it were a bill she had to pay. Then she turned to Morell. I'm sorry. Morell looked up, surprised. For what? For being the audience to his last performance, Mrs. Wynne said, and for surviving it. Morell's lips pressed together. She nodded once, accepting what was possible to accept. Ashford cleared his throat. If there's anything I can do, Wolfe said, there is not. That ended it. Ashford left soon after, with the air of a man walking away from a fire before anyone can ask why he was near matches. Morell left next, pausing at the door to look back at Wolfe. You saw the pattern, she said quietly. In the story. In the man, Wolfe replied. The story merely exposed him. She nodded and was gone. Mrs. Wynne remained a moment longer, hands in her coat pockets now, breathing like someone whose lungs had been in debt and were newly solvent. I don't forgive easily, she said. Do not forgive, Wolfe told her. Understand. Forgiveness is optional. Understanding is survival. She almost smiled. This time it was warmer. If you ever need a benefactor for those orchids, call me. Wolfe's eyes brightened with a thoroughly shameless appreciation. I will remember that. When she left, Fritz appeared as if he'd been waiting behind a curtain since the beginning of time. Dinner is served, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe rose, slowly, reluctantly, like a planet shifting orbit, and headed for the dining room. I followed because when Wolfe goes to dinner after a case, it means he's ready to speak in reflections instead of deductions. At the table, he ate the first few bites in silence. Fritz's roast was the kind of thing that makes you believe in civilized endings even when you've spent the day with murderers. Finally, Wolfe dabbed his lips and said, "It is curious, Archie. Everything is curious to you unless it's a tax form. This case was built on appetite," he said, "for rarity, for reputation, for the thrill of owning what others cannot. Kremer wanted the myth because myth sells. Hale wanted the myth because it flatters. Mrs. Wynne was used because visibility is a tool. In the end, appetite devoured its master. I chewed, swallowed, and said, "So the moral is don't drink expensive ghosts?" Wolfe's mouth curved slightly. "The moral is that men who trade in legends eventually believe them, and when they do, reality takes advantage." I lifted my glass. "To reality. It's got a nasty bite, but it keeps you honest." Wolfe raised his beer a quarter-inch. "And to beer," he said, "which keeps you sane." That was as close as he gets to a toast. Upstairs, the orchids would be getting their evening mist. The brownstone had its quiet back, and somewhere downtown, a man who tried to sell death as a story was learning that stories don't stay owned. I finished my plate and decided that for one night at least, breathing was a pretty good habit to keep.